In the year 1967, Atlanta, Georgia, was a city in the middle of change. Some parts were moving forward, talking about progress and equality, but in many places, old ways still ruled. It was a place where people still whispered when black and white. Folks sat at the same table. The civil rights movement had made noise, but not everyone had learned to listen. And in the middle of all this, there was a supper club called the Magnolia Room, fancy restaurant where the city's rich and powerful came to eat, drink, and show off. The Magnolia Room was beautiful. It had gold-framed mirrors on the walls, white tablecloths, chandeliers that sparkled, and a live pianist playing soft music every night. People came here not just to eat, but to be seen. Men wore expensive suits. Women wore dresses with diamonds around their necks. The place smelled of money, perfume, and privilege. Laughter often echoed from table to table, especially when the drinks flowed freely, working in the background. Unnoticed by most was a woman named Evelyn James. She was one of the many waitresses who served the tables, brought out food, refilled wine glasses, and cleared empty plates. Evelyn was a black woman in her late 20s, with a calm face and steady hands. She wasn't tall or loud, and she never made a fuss. She moved like she belonged in the shadows, quiet, efficient, and careful not to draw attention. Every day, she put on her black and white uniform, tied her apron tight, and made her way through the same doors, ready to smile politely at people who often didn't even look her in the eyes. Some guests never said thank you. Some snapped their fingers to get her attention. Some gave her fake compliments in strange voices, as if kindness needed to be coated with a joke. Face still and her heart steady. But there was something different about Evelyn that only a few people noticed. When she thought no one was watching, she hummed softly. A tune here, a melody there. It wasn't loud, just a little whisper of music that escaped her lips as she walked between tables or stood near the kitchen door. Would catch her humming a tune he recognized, an old jazz song, or something that sounded like a lullaby from long ago. He once asked her if she liked music. She smiled, nodded, and said, "It's in my blood." No one really knew where Evelyn came from. She didn't talk much about her past. Some people guessed she grew up in a small town. Others said she used to be a music teacher, or that she played piano in a church before moving to the city, but Evelyn never confirmed any of it. She just showed up on time, did her work, and left quietly at the end of her shift. One Thursday night, the Magnolia Room was especially busy. There was a group of businessmen sitting at a large table near the piano. They were loud, already a few drinks in, and laughing at things that weren't really funny. One of them was a man named Charles Whitman. Running a chain of stores and being friends with politicians, he had a big voice, a bigger ego, and liked to be the center of attention. Charles had brought some out-of-town guests that night. He was clearly trying to entertain them. He told long stories, made crude jokes, and waved at the staff like they were stagehands in his personal show. Evelyn had the bad luck of being assigned to his table. She moved carefully, placing dishes in front of the men, pouring wine without, spilling a drop, always with a straight face. Charles, half bored and slightly drunk, kept glancing at her with a smirk. After the main course, as the piano player took a break and stepped away from the stage, Charles leaned back in his chair and tapped his glass with a fork. "Hey," he said loudly, pointing at Evelyn. "You sing, sweetheart?" Evelyn paused. Unsure if he was serious, Charles chuckled. "Come on, you've got that look like you've got a little music in you." The men at the table laughed. Then Charles added, "I bet you can play that piano too, huh? Or is that just a movie thing?" More laughter. Evelyn opened her mouth, maybe to say something polite and walk away, but Charles raised his voice again. "Go. Ahead, show us. Give us a little something, just for fun." The room wasn't completely quiet, but people were starting to turn their heads. Evelyn felt her cheeks grow hot. Her hands, still holding a tray, trembled just slightly. She could have said no. She could have walked away. But something inside her, maybe pride, maybe anger, maybe years of swallowing words she wanted to, made her pause. Charles leaned in, smiling wide as if daring her. "Well," said. The piano sat a few feet away, shining under the soft light. The pianist's sheet music was still open. Evelyn glanced at it, then at the men, then at the guests watching silently now, curious about the scene unfolding. She didn't speak. She walked toward the piano. People watched her. Some with raised eyebrows, some with amusement. Some, including the bartender, with concern. She didn't belong at the front of the room, not according to the unspoken rules of that place. Black. Waitress was meant to stay in the background, quiet, invisible, not sitting at the grand piano, where only hired musicians were allowed to play. But Evelyn sat down. She smoothed her skirt with both hands and placed her fingers gently on the keys. Her back was straight, her eyes down. For a few seconds she didn't move. The room seemed to pause. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. And then she played one note, then another, then a chord. It was the beginning of a classical piece. Soft, slow, and haunting. Her fingers moved smoothly, like they had done it 1,000 times before. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't performing. One. Woman put down her fork and covered her mouth in surprise. Evelyn's face stayed calm, her eyes closed. Her fingers danced. The sound filled the magnolia room. It was beautiful. It came from a place deeper than memory, deeper than anger. It came from somewhere true. For the first time that night, and maybe the first time in that place, no one was laughing, and Evelyn James, the quiet waitress who had spent years being ignored, became the only person in the room anyone could see. The night had taken a strange turn. Evelyn James had just played a beautiful, powerful piece of classical music on the piano, something no one in the room expected. When she finished, she stood up without saying a word and returned to her work like nothing had happened. The room had been quiet for a long moment before people began to clap, some softly, some slowly, unsure of how to react. It wasn't the kind of applause given to a performer. It was more like a nervous release, as if people were clapping too, cover up their own discomfort. Evelyn didn't smile or bow. She simply picked up a tray from the service counter and moved toward the next table, just as she had done 100 times before. Her steps were the same, her face was calm, but something in the air had changed. People were looking at her differently now, not with kindness, at least not all of them. Some stared with surprise, some with guilt, and a few with something darker, discomfort, even anger. But she didn't let any of it show. Evelyn had learned long ago how to carry herself through a world that didn't always welcome her. She knew how to hide her feelings behind polite smiles and quiet service. Tonight she was doing the same, even though her hands still remembered the piano keys, and her heart was still beating fast from the memory of the music. Across the room, Charles Whitman sat at his table, his expression unreadable. His friends were whispering to each other, some chuckling awkwardly, others watching Evelyn with new eyes. One of the men leaned toward Charles and said, "Well, that backfired." Charles didn't laugh. He was staring at the spot where Evelyn had just played. His drink sat untouched in front of him. His face, once full of arrogance and jokes, was now hard and quiet. He didn't like what had just happened. It had started as a joke, something to show off in front of his friends. He'd thought it would be funny, a little display of control, maybe even a way to make everyone laugh. But Evelyn's music had turned it into something else. She hadn't acted like a waitress. She had acted like a master of the piano, like someone who had nothing to prove, and that had made him feel small in front of everyone. The power had shifted in that moment, and Charles felt it. He didn't like feeling small. Later that night, when the crowd began to thin and people were leaving their tables, the whispers about Evelyn spread. Some guests were curious. They asked the manager if Evelyn was secretly a professional pianist. Others said she had probably learned it in church. A few people even asked if she could play again sometime. But the manager, a tired man named Mr. Keller, just shook his head. He didn't like surprises in his restaurant. Didn't like things that broke the routine. After the last guest left, Evelyn stayed behind with the rest of the staff to clean up. She didn't speak unless someone spoke to her first. Most of her coworkers looked at her with a kind of quiet respect now, but no one really knew what to say. One younger waitress, Sarah, walked up to her while they were rolling silverware. "I didn't know you could do that," Sarah said softly. Evelyn smiled just a little. "I don't talk about it much. Why not? That was amazing." Evelyn placed a spoon on the napkin in front of her. Some people don't like it when the help shows more than they expect. Sarah frowned, not sure what to say. Evelyn turned to her and added kindly, "But thank you." In the manager's office, Mr. Keller sat with a notepad in front of him, frowning. He didn't like the attention the night had brought. In his mind, the restaurant was a well-oiled machine. The staff had their place, the guests had theirs. Everyone knew their role. What Evelyn did tonight didn't fit the image he liked to present. He was afraid that some guests might not come back. Or worse, that Charles Whitman, one of their wealthiest regulars, might complain, and he was right to worry. The next day, Mr. Keller received a phone call. It was Charles. The tone was smooth but cold. "That girl," Charles said.
The one
"From last night? You might want to remind her that she's there to serve tables, not put on a show." Mr. Keller tried to keep things calm. "Of course, Mr. Whitman, I understand." "I don't mind a little entertainment now and then," Charles continued, "but there's a way things are done. I bring important people there. I can't have surprises, especially ones that make me look like a fool. I assure you it won't happen again." Charles ended the call without another word. That afternoon, Mr. Keller called Evelyn into his office. She knocked quietly and stepped in. He didn't ask her to sit. "I heard about last night," he said, flipping through papers on his desk, as if trying to look busy. Some of the guests were impressed. Evelyn stood still, waiting for what would come next. But some of them were. Not she said nothing. He looked up at her. "You understand, Evelyn, that this is a fine establishment. We have certain expectations. Our guests come here for service, not performances." She met his eyes calmly. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. He asked me to play." "Yes, well, even so. In the future, if something like that happens again, I expect you to decline. Politely, of course." "I understand," she said quietly. He nodded. "Good. You're one of my best workers, Evelyn. I'd hate to lose you." She turned and walked out. But the truth was, something inside Evelyn had changed. She had been working in silence for years, going through the motions, hiding the part of herself that burned with music. She had buried it so deep, she had started to forget it was even there. But now, after one unexpected moment at the piano, it had all come rushing back. That night, when she went home to her small apartment, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at her hands. Her fingers still tingled from the keys. She thought about the look on Charles Whitman's face, the silence in the room, the way her music had filled the space like something holy. She hadn't just played music that night. She had spoken with her soul, and yet she was being told to. Forget it. The next few days at work were quiet. People still looked at her with curiosity, but no one mentioned the piano again. Evelyn did her job like always, but she felt the difference. The music inside her had woken up, and it wasn't going back to sleep. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The way the piano in the corner sat unused for hours. How the pianist only played what the manager told him to. How much of life was about pretending. One afternoon, during her break, she walked past an old music shop a few blocks from her home. In the window was a worn-out piano with a sign that said, "For Sal, cheap." She went inside. The owner, an old man with silver hair, greeted her kindly as she ran her fingers over the keys. "You play?" he asked. "I used to," she said. "Funny. How music never leaves you," he smiled. She nodded. She didn't have enough money to buy it, but she came back the next day. And the day after that, the owner let her play for a few minutes when the shop was empty. It became her secret place, a place where she didn't have to hide. Meanwhile, Charles Whitman didn't forget what had happened either. He told the story. To his friends, but always in a way that made him sound like the victim. "Can you believe that, Waitress?" he'd say. "Thought she was at Carnegie Hall?" His friends laughed, but some were quiet. They had felt something different that night, something they couldn't explain. Charles didn't like that feeling. He was used to controlling the room, the conversation, the people. And Evelyn had taken that from him, even if only for a few minutes. So one night he returned to the Magnolia Room. This time, brought a different group of people. Business partners. Older men who respected money and tradition. Charles wanted to prove something, to take back the attention. Evelyn saw him the moment he walked in. She kept her face blank, but her chest tightened. She didn't want trouble, she just wanted peace. But peace doesn't always come easy when you've awakened something powerful. Charles spotted her and raised a hand, calling her over like she was part of the furniture. Evelyn walked to his table, calm and quiet. "Well," Charles said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Glad to see you're back where you belong." Evelyn looked at him. "Would you like to order, sir?" He chuckled, glancing at his guests. "No piano tonight." "No," she said simply. He leaned in slightly. "Good. Let's keep things simple." Evelyn gave a small nod and turned away. But inside, the fire was still burning, and it was only a matter of time before the world would hear it again. Days passed, and the air inside the Magnolia room felt heavier than before. Evelyn James returned to work every evening, wearing her black and white uniform, tying her apron tightly and keeping her head down. She smiled politely, took orders, carried plates, and cleaned tables. On the outside, she looked like the same quiet woman she had always been. But inside her heart, something had changed. It was like a small flame had been lit, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. It kept growing. She kept remembering the sound of the piano under her hands, the way the keys had felt, the silence of the room when she played, and the strange mix of surprise and stillness in everyone's eyes. It had felt right. Not just good, but right, like she had done something she was born to do. But instead of praise, she had been warned. Instead of encouragement, she had been told to stop. Still, every night after work, Evelyn took the long way home. She walked past the little music shop where the old man with silver hair had kindly let her play his dusty piano. The shop was quiet. At night, lights turned off. She smiled and stepped through the door. The bench said, "It's still yours for a few minutes." Evelyn sat down and began to play. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster as the music poured out of her like water bursting through a crack in a dam. Mr. Thompson watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, head gently nodding with the rhythm. "You know," he said, softly, "music like that doesn't belong in hiding." Evelyn stopped playing and looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've got a gift," he said. "And gifts like that aren't meant to be buried. They're meant to be shared." Evelyn looked down at the keys. "I tried once. Caused trouble." "Some people get uncomfortable when they see something powerful in someone they didn't expect it from," he said. "Doesn't mean you stop." She didn't answer. The words stayed with her. Back at the restaurant, Charles Whitman kept showing up, not every night, but often enough. Each time he did, the mood changed. But Evelyn didn't give him that satisfaction. She stayed quiet, calm, polite. She didn't touch the piano again. Not at work, but others hadn't forgotten. One Friday night, a woman named Mrs. Lanford, a regular guest who always wore pearls and ordered the same dessert. Evelyn quietly, "You were the one who played the piano that night, weren't you?" Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." The woman smiled. "It was beautiful. You should do it more often." "Q," Evelyn said, surprised by the kind words. A few days later, another guest said the same thing. Then another. Whispers began to move through the dining room again. People were remembering. Not everyone had seen it as a problem. Some had seen it as something special. Even the bartender, a young man named Drew, began to speak up. One evening, as Evelyn brought a tray back to the kitchen, he said, "If you ever put on a show, I'll be in the front row." Evelyn chuckled softly. "It wasn't a show. It felt like one," he said. "And I think the world needs more of that." But not everyone agreed. One night, Mr. Keller, the manager, pulled Evelyn aside. His voice was low, but his words were sharp. "I hear the guests are talking again," he said. "I haven't touched the piano," Evelyn replied calmly. "I know. But I also know how fast talk turns into problems. Let's not go through that again." Evelyn nodded, but her chest ached. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about being told to stay in her place, about being told to keep quiet even. When she had something important to share at home, Evelyn began to dream again, dreams of bright lights, stages, and grand pianos. In one dream, she was sitting at a beautiful piano in front of a crowd. And when she played, the walls of the building disappeared. The sky opened up with stars. She started waking up in the middle of the night with melodies in her head. She wrote them down on scraps of paper, napkins, old receipts, anything she could find. She started to feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. One day, while at the music shop, Mr. Thompson handed her a flyer. It was wrinkled, with faded ink, but she could still read the words, "Community Talent Night, all welcome." Saturday, 7 p.m. She looked at it. "I'm sure you should do it," Mr. Thompson said. "I don't think I can. You can, and you should. No restaurant rules. No rich men trying to shut you up. Just music. Just you." Evelyn stared at the flyer for a long time. She didn't decide that day or the next, but the idea stayed with her. By the end of the week, Evelyn finally gave in. She would do it just once, just for herself. Not to prove anything, not to fight back, but to feel that freedom again. The feeling of being completely herself. She didn't tell anyone at work. She didn't want questions. She didn't want attention. She just signed up and began practicing every evening after her shift. Sometimes at the shop, sometimes at home on an old keyboard a neighbor lent her. She played until her fingers were sore and her eyes were heavy with sleep. Saturday came. The community center wasn't fancy. It was a small hall with folding chairs and a tiny stage, but it was full of people, neighbors, children, old couples, teenagers, local artists, and music lovers. There was laughter, chatter, and the warm smell of coffee and popcorn in the air. Evelyn waited backstage, her heart beating fast. She had worn her nicest dress, a soft blue one she hadn't worn in years. Her hair was brushed back neatly, and she held a small piece of paper in her hand, notes of the song she had written herself. Her name was called. She stepped onto the stage, and the chatter quieted. She sat down at the piano, got up, took a breath, and began to play. It started gently. Just a few soft notes, like a whisper. Then it grew slow and strong, like the rising sun. The room filled with her sound, a mix of joy, sadness, memory, and hope. She played like she was telling a story, and the people listened as if their hearts knew the language. When she finished, there was silence again. The same kind of silence that had filled the Magnolia Room that night. Then slowly, hands began to clap. It's not nervously this time, not awkwardly. This time, it was real. People stood up. They clapped and cheered and smiled. Evelyn looked at the crowd, overwhelmed. She had never felt so seen. So alive in the back row, someone stood watching with quiet eyes. It was Drew, the bartender from the Magnolia Room. He smiled, his arms crossed, and nodded at her. She hadn't invited him, but he had found out, and he wasn't the only one. Behind him stood Sarah, the young waitress, and Mr. Thompson. From the music shop, even a few guests from the restaurant had shown up. They had come because they remembered the way she made them feel with her music, and because, deep down, they knew she wasn't meant to be silent. When she stepped off stage, people came to her, shook her hand, thanked her. A music teacher asked if she gave lessons. A cafe owner asked if she'd like to play on weekends. A woman with a recording studio handed heart she had played for herself, and the world had listened. What she didn't know yet was that Charles Whitman had also heard, not with his ears, but through the whispers that were already moving through town. Whispers that a black waitress from the Magnolia Room had just stolen the spotlight, and he wasn't happy about it. The next few days passed slowly for Evelyn. After her performance at the community center, it felt like something had changed. She went back to work at the Magnolia Room as usual, tying her apron, smiling at guests, and keeping her hands far from the piano, but something inside her had shifted. She didn't walk with her head down anymore. She moved with quiet pride, knowing that outside this fancy restaurant, she was more than just a waitress. She was someone with a voice, a sound that people listened to. More people at the restaurant had heard about her performance than she expected. Sarah, the other waitress, couldn't stop talking about it. Drew, the bartender, made a joke every night about charging guests for a piano show. Even some regular guests began asking gently, "When will you play again?" But not everyone was happy. Charles Whitman had heard the whispers too. One of his business partners mentioned it casually at lunch. "Did you hear about that piano? Girl from the restaurant, the black waitress. Played like a star at the community center. My wife was there, she said it was unbelievable." Charles had frozen in place, his fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't say anything, just nodded politely. But inside, he was boiling. He remembered that night. He had meant it as a joke, just some cruel fun at someone else's expense. Never expected her to actually play. And when she did, the way everyone had stared nodded him. But it hurt had made him feel invisible, unimportant. That wasn't something he was used to feeling now. She was being talked about as if she were special, as if she mattered more than he did. That was something he couldn't ignore. The next time he visited the Magnolia Room, he didn't come alone. He brought a few guests, some important people, investors, and socialites. As always, he laughed too loud and drank too much. But this time, his eyes followed Evelyn more than usual, watched her carefully, almost like a predator watching prey at one point. As she passed by his table, he called out, "Hey, sweetheart, when's the next concert?" The table laughed. Evelyn paused, then kept walking without replying. That annoyed him even more. Later that night, as she stood near the bar waiting for a drink order, he came up behind her. "You think you're better than the rest of us now?" he said low enough so no one else could hear, "'cause you can bang out a few keys." Evelyn turned slowly to face him. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, calm, steady, unafraid. That silence made him even angrier. "You got? Lucky," he said, his voice cold. "But don't forget where you are, and who you are." She looked him in the eye. "I haven't forgotten anything," she said quietly. "But I've also stopped pretending I'm less than I am." Moment, he didn't know what to say. Then he gave a short, fake laugh and walked away like her words hadn't mattered. But inside he was furious the next day. Mr. Keller, the manager, called Evelyn into the office. She stepped inside and saw that he wasn't alone. Charles Whitman was sitting across from the desk, legs crossed, wearing a smug expression. Keller cleared his throat. "Evelyn, Mr. Whitman has expressed some concerns." Evelyn stood still. "What kind of concerns?" Charles leaned forward. "Let's just say your recent little performance outside the restaurant has made things complicated." "Complicated how?" she asked, her voice calm. "Well," Keller began, shifting uncomfortably, "some of our more traditional guests might not appreciate that kind of attention." "You mean they don't want a waitress who also plays music?" she asked. "It's not about that," Charles interrupted. "It's about image. This place runs on reputation, elegance, control. We can't have our staff out there pretending to be stars. It distracts from the experience." Evelyn took a deep breath. "I'm not pretending to be anything. I'm just doing what I love." On my own time, Charles leaned back. "Then maybe it's time you decide if you're a waitress or a performer. Because you can't be both." The room fell silent. Keller looked nervous. "Let's not be hasty." But Evelyn had already made her decision. "I've given this restaurant years of hard work," she said softly, "but I won't apologize for having a gift. And I won't stay quiet just because it makes someone uncomfortable." Charles laughed once. "Then maybe this job isn't for you anymore." Evelyn turned to Keller. "Is that how you feel?" Keller didn't meet her eyes. We just need to keep things simple, clean, no distractions." Evelyn nodded. "Understand." She untied her apron slowly, folded it neatly, and placed it on the desk. "I quit," she said. "And for the first time in a long time, I feel free." She walked out of that office with her head high, not looking back. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the street. The air felt warm and fresh. She had just given up the only steady job she'd known for years, and yet she felt lighter than ever. The news spread quickly. Some coworkers were shocked. Sarah cried when she heard. Drew clapped and said, "About time you followed your heart." The very next day, Mr. Thompson gave her a surprise, a chance to perform again, this time at a small local cafe that hosted weekly music nights. They needed someone last minute, and he'd already given them her name. They heard what you did at the community center, he told her. They want that magic in their room. Evelyn smiled. Let's give it to them. She played that Friday evening, and the cafe was full. People clapped, laughed, and even danced. A young girl came up after the show and said, I want to play like you one day. Evelyn bent down and said, You can. And even better, week by week, she started performing more often at churches, parks, schools, and other little places around town. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she was finally doing what made her soul come alive. And then one day, a letter arrived. It was from a woman named Lillian Carter, a retired music teacher who had seen Evelyn play and wanted to help her. Record an album. I don't have much money, the letter said, but I do have a small home studio and time to give. Let's capture your sound before the world gets too noisy. Evelyn sat down and cried when she read it. This was the beginning of something bigger, something real. But as her light began to shine brighter, so did the shadow behind her. Charles Whitman, still fuming with anger, wasn't done with her. He began whispering in people's ears, saying she had caused problems, that she was ungrateful, that she was stirring up trouble for attention. He spoke to people in the city council, at country clubs, at business meetings. She's not who you think she is. He said. Some believed him, some didn't. But the storm was building again, and this time, it wouldn't just be about a piano. It would be about a woman refusing to be silent. A woman choosing to stand tall, no matter who tried to tear her down. And Evelyn James was ready. More ready than she had ever been in her life. Evelyn James had never planned to be brave. She had never dreamed of standing out. All she wanted was to work honestly, live quietly, and play the piano when no one was watching. But life has a strange way of finding the truth in people and pulling it into the light, whether they are ready or not. Now, Evelyn was in the light. Her name was being whispered in coffee shops and churches. Her music was being shared in small local newspapers. A few young artists even uploaded short clips of her playing to social media. Somehow her sound had begun to spread. But with light comes shadow. Charles Whitman had not forgotten her. He carried her name like a thorn under his skin. The more people praised her, the more he hated her. He told people she was unprofessional. He warned business owners not to support her. And behind her back, he said cruel things about her race, her past, her place in society. She's just a waitress who got lucky, he would say with a sneer. People will forget her soon. But people didn't forget. In fact, more. People were remembering. One day a letter arrived for Evelyn. It was from the local university's music department. A professor had seen one of her cafe performances online. He was impressed and wanted to invite her to speak to his students and play a short piece for them. Evelyn was nervous. She had never stepped into a college before, but she agreed. When she walked into that lecture hall, a hush fell over the students. She stood at the front of the room, wearing a plain dress, her fingers clutching a paper where she had written some notes. She looked at the rows of young faces, then slowly spoke. I didn't go to music school, she said. I learned from an old piano in a church. I practiced after work when everyone else was asleep. I was told I wasn't good enough. I was told to be quiet. But music doesn't care about where you come from. It only asks, can you feel it? And she sat down and played. When she finished, the room exploded with applause. The professor walked over, tears in his eyes, and said, You didn't just teach music, you gave them heart. Soon after that, she was invited to perform at a local cultural festival. It was a big event. Hundreds of people, food stalls, music stages, artists, and community leaders. Evelyn was given a 20-minute slot on the main stage. This time, she didn't feel nervous this time. She felt strong. When she stepped on stage, the crowd went quiet. She sat at the piano and played a new piece, one she had written for that moment. It started soft, like a whisper, then built into something bold and joyful. It was a song about freedom, a song about rising, even when the world tries to push you down. As she played, something amazing happened. People began to cry, not from sadness, but from something deeper, from feeling understood, from hope, from truth, and in the crowd, watching quietly, was someone who had not come to enjoy the music. Charles Whitman. He stood near the back, arms crossed, lips tight. When she finished, the entire field stood up and clapped. Some people shouted her name. Children danced. Old men wiped their eyes. Strangers hugged each other. Evelyn stood, bowed once, and walked off the stage. She had no idea what was coming next. The next day, she got a call from a woman named Jeanette Hawkins. Jeanette was a reporter for a state magazine that focused on arts and culture. She had heard about Evelyn through the professor at the university. "I want to tell your story," Jeanette said. "Your real story. From waitress to musician." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "I'm not trying to make you famous," Jeanette replied gently. "But someone out there needs to hear what you've been through. Someone who's being told they can't. Someone who's hiding their gift. If you speak, they'll believe they can speak too." Evelyn agreed. The article came out a week later. It was called "The Quiet Flame: How a Waitress Found Her Voice Through Music." It included a photo of Evelyn sitting at a piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys, eyes closed in thought. The article talked about her life, the cruelty of that first night when she was forced to play as a joke, and how that moment became the beginning of something powerful. It didn't take long for the article to reach the Magnolia Room. Some people were proud. Sarah and Drew cried when they read it. Mr. Thompson hung a printed copy in his music shop window. Guests who had once seen her as just a waitress now saw her as an artist. But Charles Whitman was furious. He stormed into the restaurant. One evening, slamming the magazine down on Keller's desk, "You see this?" he barked. "She's turning herself into some kind of hero, and she's dragging this place into it." Keller tried to calm him down. "She doesn't even work here anymore, but people are talking," Charles snapped. "Our clients are asking questions. They think we're part of some shameful story." Keller frowned. "Is it really shameful? She told the truth?" Charles glared at him. "You sound just as weak as she is." Then, without another word, Charles walked out, but the damage had already been done, because more people were starting to ask. The same question: why was Evelyn punished for her talent? Why was she silenced in the first place? A few of the city's council members invited her to perform at a public event honoring local black artists. Community leaders praised her for standing up to cruelty without hate. School children began learning her name and watching her videos, and something even bigger happened. One evening, Evelyn received a message through social media. It was from a man named Jordan Miles, a well-known pianist and music producer based in another city. He had read the article, seen the performance video from the festival, and he wanted to meet her. Evelyn was shocked. He called her the next day. "I saw something in you," he said. "It's not just talent, but soul. You've got what can't be taught." They talked for over an hour. He asked if she would come to his studio and record a few tracks. Just a small project, nothing rushed. "I think your music could help a lot of people," he said. "But only if it's shared." Evelyn said yes. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't know if she'd become famous. But she knew one thing now for sure. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had once been forced to play as a joke. Now, she played by choice. She once played to survive. Now, she played to live. And something strange happened the next time she walked past. The Magnolia Room. The building looked the same. The golden letters above the entrance still shone in the sunlight. But to Evelyn, it looked smaller now, less powerful, less important. She smiled gently and kept walking. She had somewhere better to be. In a few weeks, she would be traveling to record her music. She would be speaking at a youth center. She would be helping a little girl get her first piano. Would be building something beautiful note by note. And Charles Whitman? People stopped listening to him. Slowly, his voice lost power. His name didn't matter like it used to. People remembered the woman who had played the piano, not the man who tried to humiliate her. That's how real power works. It doesn't shout, it sings.